Okay, the Department of Education is next on the Doge Trump chopping block, although this time they're going to have to go through Congress to get it formally axed, which means this is not a Doge project per se, but they have gotten the ball rolling here. So, Trump on the Department of Education, we're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good. We want to return our students to the states. It's a funny turn of phrase.
All lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible.
Okay, so right there he says we'll take all lawful steps to shut the department down. They're not actually going to be able to shut it down because they would need Democratic votes to make that happen via an act of Congress. They are going to bleed it out, death by a thousand cuts style, which is what they've done where they could.
Administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good. We want to return our students to the states where just some of the governors here are so happy about this. They want education to come back to them, to come back to the states, and they're going to do a phenomenal job. You know, if you look, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, I have to tell you, I give them a lot of credit. China's top 10. And so we can't now say that bigness is making it impossible to educate because China is very big. But you have countries that do a very good job of education.
Bigness.
And I really believe, like some of the governors here today, from states that run very, very well, including a big state like Texas, but states that run very well are going to have education that will be as good as Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and those top, Finland, those top.
Yeah, I'm sure Texas is going to be right up there. Norway, Denmark, Finland, Sweden. Yeah.
And just to be clear, because this is a really common misconception, the Department of Education has nothing to do with setting curriculum.
Right. Nope. None at
Nothing.
all. None at all.
That is why you have differences across the country between the states.
Right. That's why there's state exams, state curriculum. Yeah, the Department of Education has nothing to do with that, which means that if Texas were being held back by the federal government, they'd already have as good an education system as Finland. They don't because the people in Texas are dumber than the people of Finland, generally speaking. That's why. Okay. Sorry. Done being nice about this. President Trump signs executive order.
Isn't Finland? They just dropped one of those 100 happiest places. I think Finland was number one.
Is it? I don't know. Yeah,
I think it was number one. Yeah, I was like, what? Finland? Yeah. You ever tried the food? Jesus.
Yeah, that is brutal. It's horrible. President Trump then signs the executive order dismantling the Department of Education with the students as props behind him in their desks.
Document that turned out to be very good for the country, and I said, let's use that same pen. I don't know, is anybody superstitious? Ron, are you superstitious? Let's use that same pen.
A trance with a Schmendrick swinging it in a girl's bathroom.
And look, here's the kids do it too.
Oh, dear Lord.
Very diverse group of students there.
Very diverse. They got a little IDF soldier in waiting there.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So Elon's very happy about this. Donald Trump with the peace sign over the grave site of the Department of Education. Trump executive order aims to close the education department. President Donald Trump on Thursday signed his long-promised executive order seeking to abolish the education department, an attempt to shrink the federal role in schools, even as the White House acknowledged that killing the agency altogether would require congressional approval. Trump said the order would be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs, but he did not say which functions or funding would move from federal to state control. He also did not acknowledge that states and local school boards already pay for about 90% of K-12 education spending and make the vast majority of decisions about how public schools run. Exactly. My administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department, said Trump, who was flanked by 2 rows of children seated at school desks. The order, which came under immediate attack from Democrats and education advocates, directed Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take all necessary steps to facilitate closure of the agency to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law. It also directed her to ensure effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits, which is, of course, impossible when you cut half of the staff, which is what she did. She did that last week. The staff
those two things don't go together.
Yeah, right. The staff was a little over 4,000 people. Now it's a little over 2,000. Already one of the smallest of all of the federal agencies, which once again, if this is really about eliminating waste and making the government run more efficiently, why is this on the chopping block? It's one of the smallest agencies out there. And as we know, the Defense Department grew by $6 billion as per the Trump-approved CR. It was unclear how McMahon would go about trying to close the department or whether she would see it as a mandate to continue slashing personnel and programs. It was also unclear how hard the administration and its allies in Congress will lobby for legislation to abolish the agency, given an uphill, if not impossible, fight to win needed Democratic support. Well, with Chuck Schumer there leading the opposition, you never know. It was terrible either way, but we felt we just had to vote to abolish the education department. It's a Hobson's choice. Republicans have advocated off and on for abolishing the agency since it came into existence in 1980, and many of them welcomed Trump's decision to try to advance the cause. Since the department can only be shut down with congressional approval, I will support the president's goals by submitting legislation to accomplish this as soon as possible. Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, said in a statement. House Speaker Mike Johnson said in a post on X that he supported the order, though he stopped short of promising to bring legislation to the floor. So here was his statement on this. For many decades, the Federal Department of Education has failed our students, families, and teachers. Education is best administered by parents and teachers and those closest to students, not bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Again, they do not set curriculum for the schools. President Trump is keeping his promise and returning education to the states. The order laid out more aspirations than directives. Nonetheless, opponents feared it would lead to abandoning children and schools that rely on the department for support. That includes millions of college students who benefit from loans and grants administered by the department, schools that serve children from low-income families that benefit from supplemental funding, and parents of children with disabilities whose services are partially funded with federal dollars. So more on that in just a second, because Donald Trump made mention of this during his press statement about this. The Department of Education's useful functions, such as grants for children with disabilities and special needs, will be preserved in full and transferred to different agencies. So here he is assuring, hey, no worries.
Useful functions, and but the department's useful functions, and such as, and they're in charge of them, Pell Grants, Title I funding, resources for children with disabilities and special needs will be preserved, fully preserved. They're all going to be so. If you look at the Pell Grants, supposed to be a very good program, Title I funding and resources for children with special disabilities and special needs, they're going to be preserved in full and redistributed to various other agencies and departments that will take very good care of them. And that's very important to Linda, I know, and it's very important to all of us.
Interesting. You should make that claim, because Time Magazine just put out recently, education department staff cuts could limit options for families of children with disabilities. For parents of kids with disabilities, advocating for their child can be complicated, time-consuming, and expensive. Changes at the Department of Education are likely to make the process even more difficult, advocates for kids with disabilities say. Now, they give the big reveal comes later in this article as to why there is such a concern. When a parent believes their child is not receiving proper services or school accommodations for a disability, they can seek remedies from their district. They can file complaints with their state, arguing the child's rights have been taken away without due process of law, or even pursue litigation in state or federal courts. Those processes often involve multiple sessions with hearing officers who are not required to be experts in disability law. Legal fees can cost tens of thousands of dollars for a single case. Legal aid and other advocacy organizations that can provide free assistance often have more demand for their services than they can meet. But filing a complaint with the education department has long been an option for families who can't afford a lawyer. They begin by filling out the Office for Civil Rights online form, documenting the alleged instances of discrimination. From there, the agency's staff is supposed to investigate the complaint, often interviewing school district employees and examining district policies for broader possible violations. It's known and has the weight of the federal government behind it, said Dan Stewart, managing attorney for education and employment at the National Disability Rights Network. The process, the complaint portal, as well as the processing manual are all in public, and it does not require or typically involve lawyers. That option seems increasingly out of reach, advocates say. Now, you may say, well, I know the Chud response to this. Well, this sounds like a bunch of woke bullshit anyway. Bunch of minorities complaining that their civil rights are being violated and that there needs to be action taken by a federal agency on their behalf. This sounds like wokeness run amok, right? Well, you should know that there is a certain instance of discrimination that the Trump administration still finds particularly troubling and has directed the Department of Education to prioritize. Let's see if you can guess what that is. Under President Donald Trump, the Education Department staff has been cut approximately in half, including in the Office for Civil Rights, whose attorneys are charged with investigating complaints of discrimination against kids with disabilities. The staff has been directed to prioritize what? Anti-Semitism cases. More than 20,000 pending cases, including those related to kids with disabilities, historically the largest share of the office's work, largely sat idle for weeks after Trump took office. A freeze on processing the cases was lifted early this month, but advocates question whether the department can make progress on them with a smaller staff. So what did I say? Trump is completely owned by Israel, and it shows itself in ways that you would never even expect. You think, what could this story possibly have to do with Trump's fealty to Israel and loyalty to Miriam Adelson? Well, there you have it. There you have it. They cut the staff in half, and they have cases of American children with legitimate disabilities piling up with no one working on them because the priority in this downsized education department is dealing with anti-Semitism complaints.
Well,
once again, he is completely owned. He is owned. He is a foreign actor. He is a Manchurian candidate. The man works for Israel first in ways you would not even think about until, whoa, you're reading an article about the Department of Education, and I hear that parents with disabled kids can't have their cases heard because the downsized staff is tied up hearing about anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Well, they always have money for Israel, the military-industrial complex, defense contractors, and for tax cuts for their criminal class. That's it. That's what they want to spend money on. But now, here's the bright side here. A lot of this stuff just seems insoluble. This is a case where white people can really make a difference. If you're a white ally, you need to start flooding the education department with claims that they called your white kid a racist, and they will hire back that staff like that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Here's your chance to make a difference.
Right, exactly. And that article describes well what the Department of Education does. It handles mostly, for the most part, civil rights matters. That's why it is federally funded. And then almost all of education beyond that is delegated to the states, which is why different states have different curriculum and different standards and different testing methods, both in terms of like which standardized tests they're going to formulate, which they're going to mandate. So the idea that education is really run top down from Washington, D.C. as it stands is nonsense. It's nonsense. No. This is just once again
This has been one of
taking
those
an
culture
action
war bugaboos for them for a very long time.
since it started. Yep. Since it
Yeah.
started. Reagan talked about undoing this. The year after, it was formed in, the article said 1980. Reagan took office in 81. It was formed in 79. But Reagan talked about this on his first campaign,
Right.
about how they wanted to undo this. So, yeah, this has been one of their culture war crusades for almost 50 years. The Libertarian Party really wanted this. So this was something that they used to try and, hang their endorsement over Trump's head. And did they win it? Not really. I mean, they're going to do to this agency what they plan on doing to every agency, which is basically just nick at it until it can't really function. They need congressional approval to undo it, which they won't get, which means if and when the Democrats ever take power again, they'll probably rebuild it. Although one of the things you notice is that a pattern here is that a Republican comes in, they do a lot of damage, and then the Democrat comes in and undoes very little of that damage. That's how you have the ratchet
because their
effect
donors
to the
like
right.
it.
Exactly. Right.
Their donors like it. And then
Right.
they say, oh, I would, but we've got the Republicans, and then failing that if they win too big, because the Republicans have wrecked the country so badly that they get an overwhelming majority. Well, then they get their mansions, their cinema, the rotating villain, then that becomes the excuse. Yes, that's how we keep ending up going further and further towards a dystopian hellscape.
Indeed.
Please clap.